As David has told us, today we're celebrating the patronal festival of our church, the occasion when we celebrate the lives of Peter and Paul, to whom this glorious church is dedicated, and to reflect on what these two great giants of our faith have given to us, and how they continue to inspire and inform our journeys as individuals and as a community of faith. Now, I wonder what Peter and Paul would have thought had they been able to imagine ending up as saintly bedfellows in the church's calendar. Well, I like to think in their better moments they would have laughed uproariously. Why? Well, at first sight, these two remarkable people are not natural companions, and they've got little in common. Peter was a fisherman with a deep understanding of the sea and the weather, and his life depended upon it. He understood the nuanced signs within the waters indicating where the fish might be found, and it was hard, physical work, demanded every ounce of strength and courage. He had no formal education, as far as we know. His education, from a small boy, would have revolved around fishing, watching, listening to older family members and neighbours also engaged in fishing, learning to read the skies, the weather, the seas, learning to maintain the tools of his trade, mending nets, repairing boats. Paul had a fiery personality, born at Tarsus to Jewish parents and known originally as Saul. I was going to tell you a funny story. Martin does open the books, not at the moment, but open the book in church. And one day he was asked to play Saul when he gets changed into Paul on the road to Damascus. Well, when Martin was asked, "What is your new name?" he answered, "Frank." I don't think he's ever lived that one down. Now, Paul had a good education, developing an in-depth knowledge of the Jewish law, knowing it intimately, and he became a strict Pharisee, a man who lived according to each and every rule, and who, as a young man, was present and consented to the stoning of Stephen. After his conversion, Paul's preaching was fiery, and it upset the churches. In Acts, we read that Paul then returned to Tarsus, and the next sentence says it all. The churches throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria were left in peace. Paul spent 10 years back in Tarsus before he began his preaching, and it was a time perhaps for him to cool down and learn what the death and resurrection of Jesus meant for all of us. While Peter had walked the highways and byways with Jesus during his life, and indeed had been called by him along with the other 11 disciples, Paul did not. Paul begins proclaiming the good news, first in the synagogues at Damascus before moving to Jerusalem. Only later did Paul's mission to the Gentile world become clear, a mission that would take the good news far beyond Jerusalem, out into the further reaches of the Roman Empire, through his preaching, teaching, building Christian communities, and writing innumerable letters that have provided the foundation of so much of our theological understanding and doctrine. Paul's understanding of the nature of God and what it means to live the Christian life have continued to inform our journeys, individually and as a community. Paul's love of God, revealed in and through Christ, was born out of his deep thinking and intellectual understanding. In his writing, we encounter some of the most profound teaching not always easy to digest and understand. But in all things, no matter how heated he became, no matter how convoluted his arguments, one thing was clear. Paul understands and consistently proclaims that God in Christ loves each and every one of us, deeply, endlessly, and freely. And as followers of Christ, we are in our turn called to reflect that love, however imperfectly, in every aspect of our lives. And I always imagine that while Paul's faith in Christ and love of God were born out of intellectual understanding, I think Peter's was an emotional response, born from the heart. He felt this love. He experienced the love when he travelled with Jesus. He listened to him teach. He saw it in the healing miracles and in Jesus' relationships with and compassion for the people so many would regard as outcasts and not worth a second glance. And most profoundly, he experienced it in the forgiveness and understanding he himself received. But Peter was also impetuous, constantly misunderstood or got it wrong, and ultimately he denied even knowing Jesus, not once, but 3 times. Yet, following the resurrection and during a breakfast of fish on the seashore, Peter was asked 3 times by Jesus, "Do you love me?" 3 times Peter had denied, and 3 times Jesus now asks, "Do you love me?" Each time Peter answers the question, he earns not a pat in the back, but a new challenge. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. It is time for Peter to be a shepherd to Christ's own people. Now, Peter and Paul had their own often strong disagreements, yet it was these 2 deeply flawed individuals that God chose to be the rock on which the church is built. People who have continued to inspire others to be builders of the church, not the builders of brick and stone, but the living stones that are the people, followers of Christ, community built on the sure foundation of God's love, the community that strives to build his kingdom here on earth. And this is why we rejoice today and give thanks for these 2 great giants of our faith who continue to inspire and encourage us, the living stones of this church, the community, imperfect though we are. And this is the work we are all called to participate in, using whatever gifts and skills that have been assigned to each one of us. When we begin our journey with God, we can't know where it will lead, any more than Peter or Paul knew. And we are not always willing followers. I know there have been times in my life, on my own journey, when I've questioned, I've resisted, I've doubted, when I've not wanted to listen or to see where God is leading. So let's rejoice in all that will yet be and embrace the adventure that God has in store for each one of us as we continue first and foremost to strive as shepherds to God's people, using our voice to challenge injustice in all its forms, building his kingdom here on earth after the example of Peter and Paul, and indeed all the remarkable men and women of faith through the ages who give us hope and courage. Because without exception, they were, as we are, people with the gifts God has blessed us with, but people who regularly mess up. We get it horribly wrong. We hurt those we love the most. And yet, people through whom God works to his great and unimaginable glory, transforming our imperfect efforts, transforming our lives, and building his kingdom. Now, of late, the world has been full of news which can easily make us lose focus and lose hope. the ongoing uncertainty of the worldwide pandemic, continued killings and war in the world, heightened tension regarding equality, rising prices, they can all easily make us lose trust in God. As Christians, we need to both search for and maintain peace in our own lives, so we can share the love of Christ with others through our witness. And some ways to maintain that peace include making time every day for prayer. It's not always easy. So many distractions. But it's important to understand there's no such thing as perfect prayer. You can do it when you're hoovering, or ironing, or gardening, or washing the car. For me, my best time is when I'm out walking with our dog Sheba. And often you'll see me talking out loud. Okay, I hear you say, there goes that mad woman with her dog again. But I find outside there is space, and it's free. It's free from phones, free from interruptions, and it's surrounded by God's miraculous nature. But you will have distractions. Your mind will wander. But offering your time to God is so important. Making time for prayer is vital to having hope. And when I have hope, it's so much easier to be patient with the demands of family, people who need to talk to you, and the long line at the post office, the long line at the chemist. Patience. So no matter what the issues may be, the lesson to draw from the examples of these two great saints is to expect the unexpected. Now, I wonder if any of you remember a very old television program called Candid Camera. It always ended with a lesson, a line, the same line at the end of each episode, and it said this: remember when you least expected someone. No, start that again. Remember, when you least expect it, someone, somewhere, may walk up to you and say, "Smile, you're on Candid Camera." Well, the lesson to take from Peter and Paul is that God is like that. When you least expect it, sometime, somewhere, God may walk up to you and say, "Smile, I've got a different plan for you." It's not reasoned argument or logical debate or adherence to the law that makes us Christians and children of God. It's vision, vocation, conversion, humility, and grace. And that is what made Paul and Peter who they were, and made it possible for them to do what they did. And that is why we venerate them as the two pillars of the church of which Jesus Christ is the foundation. May we be instructed by their example and ever stand firm upon that foundation. But remember, God is like that candid camera. When you least expect it, sometime, somewhere, He will walk up to you and say, "I've got a different plan for you."